Good morning, and thank you for taking this next hour from your Friday morning to participate in this morning's webinar, Diagnosing the Health of Your Practice. My name is Brenda Penwell. I've been with Dr. Schuster and the Schuster Center for 30 years now. Some of you may have actually been on some of Dr. Schuster's webinars in the past. He normally presents one or two webinars a month, but for some of you, this may be your first time at one of your events, and if that's the case, welcome. We are a business school for dentists. We're located in Scottsdale, Arizona, and we've been helping dentists to create fulfilling and profitable practices for the last 37 years. If any of what I present this morning resonates with you, then I really encourage you to spend a little bit of time on our website. What you'll find there are numerous videos and white papers that will give you a much deeper insight into the work that we do and how we might partner with you in the future. Laura Jo Pluchel is one of my colleagues, and she's actually on the webinar with me this morning, and I believe Laura Jo has some comments before I begin.
I do. Thank you so much, and thanks everybody for being here this morning. I'm thrilled that Brenda is doing this webinar, and I hope she will do some more for us in the coming months. I just want to take a moment to let everybody know of some things that are coming up at the Schuster Center. And first I want to say that the webinar Brenda is doing this morning is actually a 4-hour workshop that Brenda normally presents. And if you like what you hear this morning in this condensed version, keep in mind that Brenda can bring this to your study club or your dental society meeting and do the entire 4-hour workshop, which is a great workshop for anybody that wants to get a deeper look at their practice. Also, following today's webinar, we're going to do something a little different, and I'm going to make sure that this webinar is available on our YouTube channel. If you haven't been to our YouTube channel, it is Schuster Center's channel, and I would encourage you to go and visit that and see what kind of videos we have there, and I will be placing this video up today as well. Also, Dr. Schuster is going to be doing a couple live events coming up soon. I wanted to make sure that people are aware of that. He's going to be doing a half-day program in Las Vegas on Friday, June 5th, and he's going to be doing that same program here at the Schuster Center Friday, August 14th, and that is the 7 driving forces for growth and profit in dentistry. So watch out for promotions on that. And finally, for our alumni joining us today, we have some special events for you. In July, specifically July 23rd and 24th, Barbara Stackhouse is doing a 2-day special event here at the Schuster Center on the dental fitness program. So that's a great opportunity to bring your hygienist and get a deeper understanding of dental fitness. Also, Brenda is doing the refresher course again here in September 17th and 18th. It's a 2-day program where we take the entire management program and we do a review of that over 2 days. So if you want some more information on those events, please give me a call here at the Schuster Center and I can give you more detail. So I'm going to turn it back over to Brenda and she can get started.
Great. Thank you so much, Laura Jo. Okay, so I'm not advancing here. Let me find here. Okay, so let's go ahead and begin taking a look at this process of diagnosing the health of your practice. So when you think about how healthy or unhealthy your practice is, what type of criteria comes to mind? If you're like most, it's either production or the number of new patients. And when your primary focus is production, whether it was your initial intention or not, you have a tendency to become more interested in your own welfare than maybe the welfare of those who you are intended to serve. So when we look at this, when we talk about the bottom line is that there are really 3 bottom lines to being a business owner. The first, we talk about worthwhile work, because the work that you do has to bring value to the lives of the people that you serve, or it's not going to bring much value to your life either. The more your intention is to make a difference in the lives of your patients, then the more you individually are going to grow, evolve, and be more engaged in your practice and in your life. And worthwhile work, doing worthwhile work, certainly brings more meaning and fulfillment to your life as an individual. You know, it's interesting to me that so many people think that work has to be difficult and has to be stressful. The reality is that worthwhile work, that is work that really has meaning for you and your patients, becomes not only a focus but a measure of your daily success, not just in your practice but in your life in general. And in the end, without purpose and enjoyment, of course, there can be no profit. And at the end of the day, if the business isn't profitable, we don't really have a viable, sustainable business entity anyway. We also have these 3 commitments that actually go along with the 3 standards of a bottom line. They're dignity and respect, service and experience, and excellence. Now, since people, that is for you, patients and staff, are our greatest assets, every effort has to be made to treat every individual with dignity and respect. They expect that, nothing less. And nothing differentiates a practice more than providing an exceptional service and a great experience for every single person that the practice serves. And then our 3rd commitment is excellence in everything that we do. You know, excellence is such an interesting word because it's really hard to define. I think the word gets overused some as with quality. But as far as dentists and their relationships with their patients, Dr. Schuster uses kind of this time-honored statement by one of his early mentors, Dr. L.D. Pankey, who said, quote, "I want to do the best dentistry I can deliver and the patient can accept, pay for, and appreciate." That's his perception of excellence as a dentist. So we're going to begin looking at this diagnostic model. How do you know if your practice is really well grounded, and what is the criteria? Well, these are the different things that we're going to look at this morning. We're going to look at the Schuster model for practice development. We're going to look at the effectiveness principle, which actually comes from Michael Gerber. We're going to look at this energy dispersion model. We're going to address the practice life cycle that every practice goes through, and it's your opportunity to really come to terms with where your practice is in this practice life cycle as well. And then we're going to look in detail at these 7 driving forces and how well these 7 forces are really working together within your practice. We're going to break it down, and I'm going to spend quite a bit of time looking at the model for spending. That is the recommended expenditures, the guidelines for overhead, doctor salary, and then the potential for profits, which means that we have to also look at this cash flow model. We also are going to talk a little bit about Pareto's principle, that is the 80-20 rule. These that you see here, these are the main models and criteria that we look at when conducting a profit potential profile, or what you might consider to be a practice diagnosis. Now, I'm going to be giving you some very specific criteria this morning that you can actually take home and apply to your own situation. I'm going to have to move through this rather quickly in order to get through all of it. So if you miss a detail, if there's something specific that you don't have an opportunity to get down in your notes, just call in after the webinar and we'll be happy to fill in the blanks for you. So I always like to start so many of my presentations with this model. This is, and those of you who have been following Dr. Schuster for a while knows that he talks a lot about these levels of dentistry because it's so foundational to every decision that every dentist makes, every owner of a practice makes in structuring their practice. So if we look at this, at the level one of dentistry, the dentists here start out with basically dental school knowledge. And when you think about it, this is where every dentist starts. It's mostly PPO and commodity-oriented dentists, patients who just simply are more interested in getting things fixed cheaply and with very little concern about the future consequences. It's just, I have a problem now, let's just get that one taken care of. As we look at level two has more advanced technical training. The practices are larger in production, probably even a larger physical facility, and which means that the doctor's lifestyle is probably a little bigger as well. It's higher quality dentistry than level 1, but the focus is still pretty much on production and the high dollar procedures. So for both the level 1 and level 2 levels of dentistry, pretty much transaction based. As we move up to level 3, what we're looking at here are dentists who have really completed more advanced technical training. They have a more comprehensive picture of what dentistry can actually do for their patients. At level 3, one of the discerning factors here is that every patient has a master treatment plan. And then when we look at
the broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
It's probably the single most difficult in which to make a living. More complex cases requiring a great deal of time in planning, preparation, and execution. Now, the reality of it is that very few manage to actually create this level of practice and maintain any sense of sanity, balance, and joy in their lives because of what is required. Okay, let's take a look at Dr. Schuster's model for practice development, which is built around these 7 elements. You might think of them as 7 strategies. We actually call them 7 driving engines. And this is going to be the foundation for what I'm going to be talking about today. When Dr. Schuster created his model for practice development, it was actually created as a mirror image of Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of human needs. But instead of looking at human behavior, as Maslow did, Dr. Schuster chose to study the needs of businesses, and in particular, obviously, dental practices. Now, as we look at this, you'll see that the foundation of the model is money. Not because we believe that money is the most important aspect of being in practice, but we do believe that you have to be in control of money in order to get beyond it. Then we look at time, and as business coaches, we recognize that it's very difficult to separate time and money, because we know that whatever is going on in the appointment book has a direct effect on what's going on in the checkbook as well. So we want to look at being able to make sure that we are fully optimizing the time that you're making available within the practice, and we'll look at some of those statistics as well. Then we look at the organizational level. An organization has everything to do with how you have structured your practice. What types of policies and systems do you have in place, and how well integrated are those systems in the daily operations? When we look at marketing, we want to look at marketing from the standpoint of, have you integrated both internal and external strategies in order to maintain an ample new patient flow? When we get to the sales level, sales is interesting because it has such a negative connotation for so many people. And I think that when sales are manipulative, it's rightfully so that it has this negative connotation. But what we want to do is we want to strive to engage our patients in the process right from the beginning. So it really begins with the co-discovery process. So rather than feeling manipulated into something, the patients are actually fully engaged right from the start. When we look at the people portion of the model, we know that people are our greatest assets. None of the rest of this can happen without having a significant team fully on board. And then, of course, at the pinnacle of the model, it has everything to do with purpose. Why does the practice exist? And what are the core values that actually drive every one of the decisions that you're making in every one of those other 6 driving engines? So this is where we want to start. So we look at this effectiveness profile was actually developed by Michael Gerber, who wrote the book The E-Myth, or the E-Myth Revisited. What he talks about there, he actually talks about the entrepreneur, the manager, and the technician. Dr. Schuster changes it a little bit, and instead of entrepreneur, he uses the phrase leader, because he believes that most dentists relate more to the concept of leadership than they do entrepreneurship. But the bottom line of this effectiveness profile is that we are all having to manage, as business owners, having to manage the 7 engines in the practice, and it requires all 3 of these roles in order to do that. The leader, of course, is that aspect of your profile, the leadership. That's where the purpose, that's where the vision and the values stem from. And everyone else is looking to you to establish those and to walk those as well on a daily basis. The manager is more dealing with the past, looking at really, how has the practice gotten to where it is today, and how are we going about managing that statistically. And then, of course, we have the technician, and we know that the majority of dentists are technicians by nature because, after all, that's where the dentistry gets done. It's in the technician's hands. If you think about these 3 roles, there's no question, but as a business owner, to be able to manage those 7 engines and managing these different aspects of the effectiveness profile really requires a lot of energy. So if you think about the energy of your practice, before planning to increase profitability, you have to be sure that there's sufficient energy in order to achieve the goal, because growth requires energy, and it requires lots of it. So energy might be the starting point, but alone we know that it just isn't enough. On its own, energy is aimless, it's uncontrolled, and it's unproductive. This is what that looks like. We know that energy comes in, right? Every staff member, including yourself, who comes to work every day in that practice is bringing their energy. But if there's a lack of planning, if there's poor communication and undefined structure, inadequate systems, then what happens is there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lack of discipline, poor communications, lack of scale, and all of that just simply leads to lower productivity, lower revenues, and low profits. It's what they call in the Vital Corporation an energy dispersion model. Enough energy is coming in, but there's just nothing there to really guide it. So people feel like they're working hard, but they're really not making a difference, and therefore they get burned out. Now, by contrast, if we apply these 3 lenses, if we look at direction and organization and people, and we apply these 3, then what happens is that energy begins to take on much greater force, and it has much greater power, because we're converting that engine, again, directing it through these different lenses. And the actual result then is greater profitability, more controlled growth, and higher quality in everything that we do. So one of the ways that we look to guide and control the energy is by being as proactive and as creative as possible. So we know that there are basically 2 orientations to life and business. One is being reactive, and 85% of people simply respond in a reactive way to life and business, leaving 15% more operating in the creative orientation. So if we look at what that means, okay, with reactive, what we're looking at is, problem solving, everything transaction-based, looking for problems to simply fix. But there's a high failure rate to achieve any long-term objectives because all of our energy simply gets eaten up simply reacting to the day-to-day problems. And then it takes energy away from us. We end up going home tired, we're burnt out, and we're at odds not just with ourselves but with the world in general. You may be making some money, but you're not necessarily creating wealth. If we look at that in opposition to the creative orientation, where it's outcome oriented, we're focusing on the future. We're looking to produce more long-term rewards. So we're looking not just at problems, but we're looking for solutions. The creative orientation has a tendency to create high-performance individuals, which result in high-performance teams and therefore high-performance businesses. And rather than taking energy away from us, it actually enhances our energy. It's possible to go home at the end of the day feeling excited and engaged with as much energy that we started the day with. You make a good income in this structure, and your money allows you to create actual wealth. Okay, so when we think in terms of a dental practice, we look at the different stages that a dental practice naturally processes through, right? So every practice at some point starts in startup. It's where we all begin. And then the initial stage is adolescence. Well, in that adolescent stage, there's typically pretty high debt, right? Coming out of dental school where we've created a practice, whether we've done a startup or whether we bought an existing practice, we've had to do that by creating some debt. And cash flow is low because we're just basically getting started. There can be a lack of organized systems, which of course is going to lead to a fairly high degree of chaos. But as you can see from the upward status of that red line, it's beginning to pay off. So we can see that we have a good future here. And the next stage that we move into then is the great stage. This is where we really start to have fun. It's the stage for growth. Now, we mark that growth stage by a 15 to 20% increase in annual growth in profits each year. There's a clear sense of direction. We've got high morale. The practice is really emphasizing patient care, and patients are responding to that, which means that the systems that we've put in place are continuing to lead to additional growth. Now, it may be, probably, undoubtedly, in this particular period of time, that we're going to have to upgrade equipment needs because we're starting to do more technical dentistry as well. And we may actually be having to add some staff people as well in order to manage and serve the growing patient base. Again, beginning to have lots of fun here. Now, the goal is obviously to stay here as long as possible, because the next step in the natural progression is what we call maturity. Now, in maturity, there can be, this loss of drive, less excitement, less enthusiasm. And at this point, there can begin to be more focus on having an exit strategy, maximizing cash flow in order to maximize the practice value so that you can prepare it for sale. So at this level, we're not having quite as much fun. And when we're not having as much fun and we're not as enthusiastic, it's reasonable to expect then that quality can certainly suffer. So again, our goal is to stay in that growth phase for as long as possible, right? Which requires the practice to stay healthy. So let's look now at the 7 engines and how we're going to measure just how healthy a practice is. So we're going to start at the foundation of the model, which was money. So we're going to talk first about what a healthy finance engine looks like. Questions that you might ask at this level: what should my overhead actually be? How much should I be taking home as the owner doctor? What does a healthy budget look like? How much should I be saving? How much will I need to retire, and where are those dollars going to come from? Should I raise my fees, and by how much? Now, when we look at diagnosing how healthy a finance engine is in a practice, we know that the health of the finance engine is basically a report card of all 7 engines. And our target is to look at achieving and maintaining a 24% net profitability. Now that's over and above overhead and doctor's salary, and we're going to look in a minute at what that actually looks like. But other things that you might be wanting to get a handle on as well is what your collection ratio is. We're looking for a 98% or greater collection ratio. Looking at the aging of your accounts receivable. Is it healthy? Is there less than 10% of your total receivables in that 90-day and older column? And then how much debt is the practice having to service as well? So staying with the finance engine now, we're going to look at this model for spending, because basically what this represents is 100% of your total net collections. And every dollar that gets collected is going to get spent in one of these components of the model for spending. So we look at controlling overhead in a general practice, we're talking about 52%. If you have a specialty practice, then that range is going to vary anywhere from the 34 to the 52. And if you'd like specifics on a specialty practice, please, I encourage you to call in and we can help you with that. So we're looking at the overhead at 52%. We're looking at doctor's salary being managed at 24%, again, of total net collections. We want to be protecting the solvency of the practice, and we do that by setting aside 10% of total net collections. We want to be able to provide the doctor with a return on investment for his investment in the practice. We do that with an additional 10% of total net collections, and what is left over then is what we call additional profit. And that range, again, based on whether the practice is a general practice or whether it's a specialty practice, the range of additional profit can span anywhere from 4% to 22%. But let me break it down for you a little bit further. And we'll look first at our fixed expenses. And our target for our fixed expenses is, again, based on the specialty or general practice, we're looking at a range of 24 to 31%. And this is how that breaks down. We're going to look at staff compensation in a general practice at 20% of total net collections. Occupancy, which includes everything that it costs us to maintain our facility, at 6%, and then human and physical resources, abbreviated here as H&P, at 5%. When fixed costs are high, so when you look at your fixed costs, if you're exceeding that 31% as a target, it typically indicates that it's a revenue problem versus the variable expenses, which we'll look at next, which have a different criteria. So our variable expenses, we're going to target 21%. That's our supplies, it's our marketing, it's our outside laboratory, and it's our administrative services. The target, again, not to exceed 21%. When our variable expenses exceed the model, we recognize that it's typically a spending problem. Because by definition, variable expenses vary up and down based on what we produce. We have far greater control over our variable expenses than we do of our fixed expenses. But just how critical is maintaining your overhead? Well, let's look at an example of that. Because the question becomes, how much does each 1% in excess overhead cost you? Well, if we were to look at a practice that, say, has annual net collections of $800,000, 1% of excess overhead, just doing the simple math, would be a little over $666 a month in excess overhead. But just imagine if you had the discipline to take that $666 and invest it for 20 years with a average return rate of 6%, that 1% in excess overhead would net you $308,000. Now that's for 1% of excess overhead. And let me just say here that for a lot of our clients, when they begin our management program, we're looking at average overhead somewhere in the range of 65 to 67%. You can do the simple math with that. If $308,000 is what you have the potential to recoup just with 1% of excess overhead, you can imagine if your overhead is 10 or 15% high, what you're actually leaving on the table. So when we break it down then and we look at that model for spending, we're looking at overhead, we're looking at doctor's salary. The combination of that is what we call, in our terminology, we call that the red line. It's the break-even point. But then we look at setting that 10% of solvency aside. That brings us to what we call our blue line. Again, we're going to fund the return on investment for the doctor, for taking the risk, right, for being the entrepreneur and the leader. And adding the ROI brings us then to our green line. We have the potential then for our additional profit, and that brings us to what we call the black line. Kind of hold on to that phrase there, black line, because you're going to see that surface here on another slide here pretty soon. So now we're looking at the finance engine that has these basic 5 key numbers kind of as barometers. So the question to you is really, how healthy are these numbers in your practice? And do you have criteria for really measuring their health? So we're looking at how much money is coming in, right? That's your sheer net collections. How much is going out in terms of your overhead expenses and doctor's salary? How much do you owe? Are you paying your accounts payable current every month? How much is owed to you? That's your accounts receivable. And then how much cash is actually being saved in the practice to protect the practice itself? That's your solvency. I think this is kind of an interesting model to look at, because what this does is this helps us to really get a feel for what we're going to need to fund our personal retirement. So if we were to take a look at this scenario where we have someone who's approximately 45 years old and they're hoping to retire at age 65, that means that they've got another 20 years, pretty significant period of time in which to plan for that retirement. And then based on family genetics and everything else, they're looking maybe to live to be 90 years old. So which means that they're going to have 25 years in retirement that needs to be funded. They need to find out a way, right? They need to have sufficient funds available in order to maintain their lifestyle for that 25 years. So if your standard of living, say it's $100,000 a year, then that means that you're simply going to need, right, simple math, $2.5 million in your retirement fund in order to live out the remaining 25 years and not have to change your lifestyle. Well, let's assume that you currently already have $500,000 in your retirement fund. That would mean that you're going to need to accumulate $100,000 in each of the next 20 years in order to accrue those retirement funds that are going to be needed. And how are you going to go about doing that? Have you created a plan that allows that to happen comfortably? This is what Dr. Schuster calls his bucket theory. And basically what this is designed to do is to simply indicate that the size of the income bucket is actually being driven by what the business expenses are, what your lifestyle requires, right, from a personal budget, what sort of tax structure you're in, and then for the savings and investment. Do you have children who you have a responsibility to educate? And then again, planning for your own personal retirement. So we look at trying to be able to manage those four smaller buckets because that's what is driving the size of that income bucket. Now, what we're going to look at next are called the 8 habits of creating wealth, which are great reminders of just how simple and basic creating wealth can be if in fact we're mindful and good and responsible stewards of our money. So let's look at these. Okay, habit number 1 is to learn to create value. To create value for your patient, you have to know what the patient is seeking. This is probably the single most violated law of creating wealth because we have a tendency to prejudge and to think that we know what the patient needs and what they want. We can't assume that. Your patient has created their own pictures of their preferred future, and it's your responsibility to get a good look at that picture. Habit number 2 then is saving 10% of what you earn. I mean, really, how many times have you heard that? Every financial planner who you listen to or financial planning article that you read always talks about saving 10% of everything that you earn. But when you think about it, where does that money come from? Excess overhead in many instances, and also potentially decreasing your tax burden. In our experience, dentists, for the most part, are paying more in tax than they need to by not working with a CPA who really has the expertise that they need. Habit number 3 is to control your expenses. We've already talked a little bit about that, but I think it's important to mention the danger of what we call lifestyle creep. It happens to all of us. Controlling your expenses requires a commitment to really redirect the flow of money in your business and in your personal life. And utilizing a percentage budget has a very creative orientation, and it puts you in control as well. Habit number 4 is to never lose money. In the world of money and investments, you have to know what you are doing and be in control of yourself at all times. People who invest emotionally are prone to very costly mistakes. I mean, let's be real. If you think you're going to make a killing on some investment, you're probably walking into a trap by someone who's a little more clever or at least a little more predatory than you are. Habit number 5 is to invest in what's known before you invest in what's unknown. If you put your money in danger instead of protecting it, you're simply gambling and not investing. We know that the greatest investment that you can make is obviously in your practice. Habit number 6, using compound interest. We know that when you borrow, it works against you, but when you save and invest, it becomes your greatest ally. Habit number 7, ensuring a future income, right? When you start a business, you should begin to create your exit strategy right away. It's not a matter of looking at how quickly can we retire, but it's sure nice if you can choose to work rather than having to work. And being able to create passive income certainly allows you to do that. And then finally we have habit number 8, and that's increasing your ability to earn. And I love this. It says, see yourself as a contribution. The more value that you create in the lives of others, certainly the more value that you're going to create in your own life. So the questions for you really become, how can I serve you, and how can I make a difference in your life? Okay, that's it for the finance engine. Let's look at the healthy time engine then. With the time engine, what we're looking at here is, for instance, doctor production per hour, hygiene production per hour, and then looking at a scheduling template to be able to manage our A, B, and C procedures. What we look to measure here is being able to schedule, and here's that phrase I told you to remember, the black line, looking to schedule the black line for the day by 1 o'clock. And that's assuming that, if you take your lunch hour from 1 to 2, it gives you a good solid 5 hours in the morning from 8 to 1, which is typically your most high production procedures. When we look at regaining time control, we've got 6 steps to look at. Number 1 is do only what is in harmony with your vision and your values. Number 2, scheduling large blocks. And step 3, sticking to your schedule. Step 4 is to review your schedule a week in advance and being able to review your performance, what's working and what isn't. And I love step 6. It's simply learning to say no. What do you say no to? See step number 1. If there's something that is inconsistent with your vision and your values, something that isn't adding to fulfillment or to a patient experience, that's when we have to say no. Relative to time, again, I mentioned already looking at creating a scheduling template that allows you to manage your A, B, and C time. We do that through a color-coded template where we look at our A procedures being our blue time. They're the highest and best use of our time. Our green time, those activities that simply enable us to do more of the A activities. And then the C, the red time, those things that if they never appeared on your appointment book again, you'd be perfectly happy with that. The healthy organization engine. With this, we're looking at, okay, what percentage of the doctor capacity is being utilized? What percentage of the hygiene capacity is being utilized? This is expensive time that we're making available. Is it being scheduled with patients? What type of cancellations and no-shows, and what type of recovery do we have of that time? What percentage of patients that are due for recare are actually being seen in the month that they're due? And how do I keep patients engaged in completing their treatment? What we want to measure here is 85% of the doctor hours that you're making available, that 85% of those hours are being spent treating patients. When we look at hygiene, we want to look at, of the hygiene hours that are being made available, 100% of them being spent treating patients. We'd like to see an 85% or greater recare ratio. That is, 85% of the patients who are due in recare are being seen in the month that they're due. And then looking at having written policies and systems to guide the flow of the energy, to actually creating the organizational structure to allow these things to happen. This next model is what we call the tip of the iceberg. And if you look at this, the way that we read this is that structure, which is at the foundation, influences the patterns of behavior in the practice, and it's the patterns of behavior that are determining the results or the events that are happening now. So if you find that you're unhappy with a result in some area of the practice, it's not enough to just simply go back and look at the behaviors and point our finger at people's. We have to be willing to go back, all the way back to the organizational structures that are in place and maybe have been in place for a very long time. At the foundation of the structure are, of course, those core values. That's what determines what structure is actually appropriate. The next thing we do relative from an organizational engine standpoint is to engage this 80-20 principle. It's the principle of imbalance. We know that not all things are equal, not all efforts are equal, which I know goes against traditional thinking. But we know that 80% of your profits typically come from 20% of your patients. So we want to be sure that we're focusing on that 20% of the patients. 80% of decisions made in meetings come from 20% of your meeting time, and 80% of what you produce comes from 20% of your working hours. Again, all tells us how really critical organizational structures truly are. Okay, let's look at a marketing engine now. Questions that you might ask: how effective is your new patient exam process? For us, philosophically, the new patient exam process is at the foundation of the marketing engine. No question about that. And another question, is your new patient flow sufficient to maintain healthy growth? So what we want to look at is the number of new patients per month. Is it consistent with your practice vision, and does it support the practice budget? So when we look at creating what we would consider to be a sales funnel, it all starts with the marketing energies. And our marketing is simply designed to generate calls of interest, whether we're talking about internal marketing or external marketing, because it's those marketing efforts, the marketing strategies, again, that are designed to make the phone ring. So the first important thing to look at is what those phone protocols are. Do we have structured messages for how we're going to handle appointing those potential new patients? Next step being the preclinical interview with the doctor, moving into that new patient exam, conducting the review of findings, creating the master plan and the actual case presentation with the patient, looking at the different treatment protocols, and then, of course, maintaining a healthy recare program, which we've already established should be 85% or greater. The sales engine then, oftentimes people ask the question, do I only have to sell big cases in order to make money? And of course the answer is no. But we do have to look at what is your case acceptance percentage and what should it be? Is that something that you're even tracking? I find that the majority of doctors aren't even tracking that. What percentage of the dollars being presented are actually being accepted? Another great question to ask. Criteria we look at: greater than 85% case acceptance. We'd like 85% of new patients getting a formal comprehensive exam, and 85% of those comprehensive exams accepting a minimum of phase 1 dentistry. Okay? Again, great criteria to look at. Then we look at having a healthy people engine. How do I know if I should keep someone or let them go? And how do I find and keep good people? We want to look at having our production per hour being equal to our production per patient, right, a 1-to-1 ratio, and then recognizing that we want to be able to cover our cost per hour, right, which was the red line, plus that 24% target for profitability. When that happens, we know that we've got a good team fully engaged who we have empowered to partner with us in this process. People are the building blocks of any organization, any group. We know that people truly are these building blocks, and your success will ultimately be determined by the quality of the people that you are successful to recruit. Well-informed employees are empowered employees. They have ideas about ways to improve productivity in their jobs and about shaping the different policies and systems that are affecting them. And it's your job as the business leader to provide them with opportunities for input and be able to benefit from it. Vince Lombardi, who was the legendary coach of the Green Bay Packers, said that heart power is the strength of your organization. I love that phrase, heart power. But you know, the Gallup organization recently did some research and shared their findings, which indicates that 56% of current employees across the board, not just in dentistry, but they actively report that they are disengaged in the workplace. And more than 15% report that they're actively disengaged. I mean, wow, that's more than 70% of employees just taking up space. Heart power may be the most underutilized resource in billions today. I think that millions of employees go to work every day with untapped heart power, and they wait for their organizations to simply give them a reason to commit themselves. We know that engaged hearts motivate themselves, and everyone is motivated when they're doing a job that they really believe in, but we have to provide that for them. In traditional business environments, the best way for someone to increase their income is to work their way up the corporate ladder, right, through promotions, and each promotion brings them a little higher salary. But what about dentistry? You know, in dentistry, that corporate ladder is really pretty short, which means that we have got to find ways to give our good people, again, a reason to stay, give them more opportunities to make a contribution. We can't talk about people and not talk about compensation, because no matter what you pay someone, someone will always remember that while you can buy someone's heads and hands, they have to give freely of what's in their heart, right? Study after study has shown that what motivates people isn't money. Money can make employees unhappy if they're not sufficiently compensated, but it hasn't shown to lead to motivation or greater performance. Without a consistent review of purpose and mission, we know that anyone's duties can really take on a lesser value, and again, people begin to get bored. So one of the ways that we do that is by giving everybody opportunities to stay connected. We do that through 10 to 15-minute morning huddle every day. We do that with our 2-hour weekly staff meetings. We do that with half-day quarterly meetings and then an annual staff retreat for 1 or 2 days. And what that allows us to do is to focus on what we have here, our healthy purpose engine. What type of practice do you want to have, and is it possible for you to create it? Do you have the energy and the passion to stay committed to make what changes are going to be necessary to really create that practice of your dreams? So again, 7 elements, 7 engines. I want to look briefly again at each one of those. So we talked first about the finance engine. That's the money. If you don't get complete control of money, money's going to control you. If you don't control money in the present, there is no way that you can create wealth. And keep in mind, you know, when we use this term wealth, Dr. Schuster wrote a book in the last couple of years called The Science of Creating Wealth. And in it, he talks about wealth not just in terms of money, which I think is an important concept, because he talks about wealth in terms of abundance. And we can have abundance in our life, not just with money, but with peace, joy, family, love, all those things as well. Looking at time again, we know that if you don't get complete control of money, you'll never have the time to do what's really important in your life. You're going to spend your time just simply chasing production and responding to your debt rather than actually creating wealth. Organization. The majority falsely believe that technical know-how has growth power. It's only when that technical knowledge is really organized into useful delivery of high-quality dentistry that the technical knowledge really has any type of growth power at all. I think that's why there is so much frustration in dentistry today with so much technical capacity simply sitting on the shelf. We hear that phrase a lot, you know, how do I get my technical skills off the shelf? Well, oftentimes it really has to do not with the technical knowledge that you have, but with how the practice is actually being organized and structured, that there aren't systems in place to allow that to really release the power. When we look at marketing, if we don't have a profound knowledge, if you don't have a profound knowledge of your offering and how it fulfills the emotional needs of a segment of the marketplace, that is your target market, you're always going to be wondering where your next patient is coming from. Really coming to terms with what your offering is, that is how your patients, what is the emotional benefit or payoff that your patients receive as a result of their interaction with you. That is what has to drive all of your marketing strategies. With sales, and again, looking at sales strictly from the new patient engagement process, if you don't have a compelling story to relate to a patient and don't have a tested, reliable process to engage patients to say yes to your offering, you'll never come any place close to your potential. You have to have a set system that is almost a checklist when you go through that process, so that you're able to engage patients right from the start and keep them engaged all the way through the process of actually completing the treatment plans that you set out for them. Having the right people in the right roles and having them highly trained to complete their tasks is, again, vital key to growth. Employment, rewards, inspiring and engaging work, and people who want to do the work is a vital key to growth. And then finally, the purpose and the vision. The vision of a business has to be constantly communicated in ways that inspire, engage, and motivate people to go to the next level of performance. And when I think about this, I'm not just thinking in terms of you as the dentist or your staff members, but in terms of the patients as well. We want them to also go to the next level of performance. But communication has to go beyond informing. It's not just a matter of talking at people, but it really has to inspire by connecting to people's values. And the only way to do that is to be sure that you're spending the appropriate amount of time early on in that new patient process in order to make sure that you are truly connecting. So these are the 10 leverage points in a highly productive, highly efficient, and effective practice. We're looking at tracking the organizational management, looking at that 80-20 principle, talking about what your A, B, and C procedures are, as well as the ABC patients, and how that relates to the 80-20 principle. Creating a referral strategy to drive marketing, looking at creating percentage budgeting with money, but also budgeting your time as well. Looking at that new patient process, having a documented sales process where every patient truly has a master plan. And then looking at, from a hygiene standpoint, do we have a dental fitness plan in place that really allows us to track how healthy our patients are? Are they getting healthier? And then looking at recare, patient retention, and reactivation. These 15 questions are questions that Dr. Schuster has created that in dealing with a lot of our newer clients, he asks these questions, and I think that it's worth taking a minute to review these. Do you have enough money in your life? Is money your friend? How much money is enough, weekly, monthly, yearly? Do you know what that number is? How much money do you spend every month in your business? How much money do you spend every month personally? You know, we talk about how important it is to have a practice budget, but it's equally important to have a personal budget as well, because we know that the demands that are being made by our personal lifestyle are putting demands on the practice as well. How much do you pay in federal and state income taxes annually? Gee, with Wednesday of this week being the 15th, that number should be pretty upfront in everybody's minds at this point, because they probably just had to write their checks. How much money do you save each month and each year, and is it sufficient? How many years have you been in practice? How much money have you saved or invested? When you stop and think about how many years you've been in practice and the amount of money that has crossed the front desk, right? How much money have you been able to save or invest as a result of that? And how much debt do you have in your business? And are you able to comfortably service that debt? Have you created an integrated life plan, business plan, tax and investment plans? If you have, are you executing the plan? Having the plan is great, but it needs to be put into action in order for it to really have any power. Do you have someone holding you accountable to execute your plan and create wealth and freedom? Do they have your best interest at heart? And then finally, number 15, how much money do you need in order to create economic freedom? And by when is that going to happen? So if any of those questions made you uncomfortable at all, then maybe the logical next step for you is to really determine your current reality. Now, you can try to do it on your own, or you can ask for help. With just an investment of a little bit of your time, we can walk you through a co-diagnosis of the 7 engines in your practice. Because the questions really become, how healthy is your practice? How healthy, based on the criteria that I've talked about, how healthy is it today, and really how healthy do you want it to be? And with that, I thank you for your time, but please don't disconnect now. I'd like to bring Laura back on the line.
Thank you, Brenda. As always, we like to offer some follow-up with our webinars because, without personal application, knowledge tends to go nowhere. So Brenda is offering a mini diagnosis of your practice to get really clear on your current reality. And these take about 30 minutes. And what she does is she takes a snapshot of each of the 7 engines and the 7 driving forces in your practice and gives you a chance to get really, really clear about what's going on in your practice and how it relates to the model of health that Brenda presented today. So if this is something that you would like, we certainly want to give you a chance to have that with Brenda. And all you have to do is say yes right now, and we will get that scheduled. As I said, it only takes about 30 minutes, and it's just a snapshot of what's going on in your practice today. So I'm going to give you a couple minutes. I do know that we had some audio problems at the beginning of the webinar. I do apologize. Thanks for hanging in there with us. And I am going to be putting this up on our YouTube channel, hopefully by this afternoon. You just want to search for Schuster Centers channel, and you should be able to find all of our videos and webinars. As a reminder, since I don't know if you heard at the beginning of our webinar that this is a workshop that Brenda offers. She can bring it to your study club or your dental society meeting. We also have Dr. Schuster presenting 2 live seminars this summer, one in June in Las Vegas and one in Scottsdale in August. So if you want information on those, please be sure to let me know via email, or you can give me a call. And also for our alumni, we have 2 special events coming up. Barbara Stackhouse's Dental Fitness event is July 23rd and 24th here in Scottsdale. And the 2-day refresher course is coming up in September, which will be September 17th and 18th, also here in Scottsdale. So if you want information about that, please let me know. You will be getting emails about those, but I know sometimes they slip by you. You're always welcome to give me a call, and I can go into more detail about those with you. So thank you so much for being with us today. We certainly appreciate it. We hope you got a ton of value out of the information provided. But again, take the opportunity to spend a few minutes with Brenda, and you can take this a little bit deeper into your personal practice situation. Thanks again. Have a wonderful weekend, and we hope to hear from you soon.